Preface to On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leni. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, translated by John Selby Watson. Preface. My business has been to give, in the following pages, a literal translation of the 6 books of Lucretius. This task I have carefully performed, and it will, I trust, be no presumption to say that he who wishes to know what is in Lucretius without perusing the original will learn it from this volume with greater certainty than from any other previously offered to the English reader. The text immediately followed is that of Forbidger, which may, indeed, be rather called Wakefield's, for the one varies but little from the other. But I have not dismissed a single page of the translation without consulting the texts of Lambenus, Creech, and Haverkamp, which are substantially the same, and in many instances far more satisfactory than Forbidger's. Concerning all disputed or obscure passages, I have diligently examined the commentators, especially Lambenus, who is almost instat omnium, Creech and Wakefield, and have added explanatory notes respecting either the subject matter or the translation of particular words or phrases. The words which it has been found necessary to supply are distinguished by italics. Where a participle and a verb having a similar signification come together in construction, they have occasionally been rendered as 2 verbs. Thus, sparsus disjicitur will be translated is scattered and dispersed. The particle iam is sometimes omitted, and where a succession of copulative conjunctions occurs, which Lucretius uses superabundantly, one has occasionally been left out in the translation, or been rendered by while, as well as, or in some similar way, for the sake of variety. Any other deviations from the structure of the text, which in the least concern the student, are pointed out in the notes. Tu and tous in the addresses of the poet to Memmius or the general reader are sometimes translated by thou and thine, and sometimes by you and your. Where Lucretius seemed to be particularly earnest, I have adopted the former mode, and in other cases the latter. J.S.W. Remarks on the Life and Poem of Lucretius. Of the life of Lucretius but little information has reached us. Ad nos vix tenuis famae perlabitur aura. That he was a Roman by birth is inferred from the passages in his poem in which he speaks of the Roman world as his country and of the Roman language as his native tongue. As to the time of his birth, it is stated by Eusebius, in his Chronicon, that he was born in the 2nd year of the 171st Olympiad, or 95 years before Christ. At this period, Ennius had been dead about 70 years. Cicero was in his 12th year. 25 years were to elapse before the birth of Virgil, and 4 before that of Julius Caesar. His style, indeed, would make him seem older, but its antiquated character may be partly affected, in imitation, perhaps, of Ennius, for whom he expresses great veneration. Concerning his family nothing is known. The name of Lucretius, from the time of Lucretia downwards, occurs frequently in the history of Rome, with the surnames Tricipitinus, Cinna, Ofella, and others attached to it, but with whom the poet was connected or from whom descended it is impossible to discover. There was a Lucretius Vespillo contemporary with him, a senator mentioned by Cicero and Caesar, of whom Lambenus conjectures that he may have been the brother, suggesting that the one brother, by engaging in public life, might have attained senatorial dignity, while the other, devoting himself to literature and retirement, might have continued in the equestrian or even plebeian rank in which he was born. But all this is mere empty conjecture. Equally groundless is the supposition, started also by Lambenus, that in his youth he went to Athens to study, and there, under the instruction of Zeno, who was then at the head of the Epicureans, became imbued with the doctrines of Epicurus. That he attached himself to the tenets of Epicurus is certain, but when or where he studied them is not now to be ascertained. Dunlop, however, asserts that Lucretius was sent with other young Romans of rank to study at Athens. Thus it is that errors crept into biography and history. The learned conjecture and the less learned affirm. Lambinus suggests that Lucretius might have gone to Athens. Dunlop states that he did go. Lambinus says that it is probable. Dunlop says it is fact. He wrote his poem, or part of it, as appears from a passage near the beginning of the first book, at a time when the Roman Commonwealth was in a disturbed state. But whether the disorders to which he alludes were, as is generally supposed, those excited by Catiline, or, as Forbiger suggests, those which were raised by Claudius 8 years afterwards, there is no means of deciding. His poem and his life, if we may trust Eusebius, were ended in the manner following. Having been driven to madness by an amatory potion, and having composed several books in the intervals of his insanity, which Cicero afterwards corrected, he died by his own hand in the 44th year of his age. By whom the potion was administered is conjectured only from a passage in St. Jerome, who says that a certain Lucilia killed her husband or her lover by giving him a philtre which was intended to secure his love, but of which the effect was to render him insane. This Lucilia is supposed to have been the wife or mistress of Lucretius, but by whom the supposition was first made I am not able to discover. He is said by Donatus, or whoever wrote the old life of Virgil, to have died on the day on which Virgil assumed the toga virilis. That Cicero corrected what he wrote, there is, except from the passage in Eusebius, no indication. From a passage in Varro, it has been concluded that he wrote many more books than have reached us. For Lucretius, says he, suorum unius et viginti librorum initium fecit hoc, aetheris et terrae genitabile quaerere tempus. But Lambinus has very plausibly conjectured that for Lucretius should be substituted Lucilius, or the name of some other writer unknown to us. This is the more probable, observes Eichstadt, as Varro was older than Lucretius, and was not accustomed to draw examples and testimonies from younger writers. From the 6 books, as they now stand, there is no inference to be drawn that more were written. That something more was intended is perhaps true, for when we consider how the 6th book breaks off, we must either suppose that he designed to write a conclusion to it, or that he meant another book to follow. It signifies, however, that he was drawing to the conclusion of his undertaking, and indeed the doctrines of Epicurus are so fully set forth in the 6 books that little more could have been added respecting them. It is true that there are 2 or 3 allusions among the grammarians to passages and verses which are not now found in the 6 books, allusions which have led to the belief that there were more books, but which, with other considerations, led Spalding, the editor of Quintilian, to the suspicion that there were 2 editions given by the author himself, and that, though the second was generally followed, the first was not quite forgotten. Thus, the 937th verse of the first book, which is now read, Contingunt melis dulci flavoque liquore, is cited by Quintilian, Aspirant melis dulci flavoque liquore. And Servius, on those lines in the Georgics, Non ego cunta meis amplecti versibus opto, non mihi si linguae centum sint oraque centum, ferea vox, says, the verses are Lucretius's, but he has aenea vox, not ferea, verses which are not now to be found in Lucretius. This notion of 2 editions Eichstadt has noticed at some length in his dissertation De Lucretii Vita et Carmine, and Forbiger has written a long essay to show that Lucretius's verses have been much altered. Fateor enim, says Forbiger, ex quo primum Lucretii Carmen studiosius per legerim operamque meam e inavaverim plures mihi oblatas esse causas suspicandi, nobis in his sex de rerum natura libris non unius Lucretii seduorum scriptorum longe diversorum manum